to our monthly webinar. And I see folks are still trickling in. So we're glad to have you all here for our February webinar. I forgot what month it was for a second. And our webinar today is entitled So Much Potential, Latinx Students in Higher Education, presented by Dr. Laura Gonzalez. Just a brief, some brief housekeeping. We use the term Latinx to account for the gender binary inherent in Spanish language. Latinx is a more inclusive term of the gender spectrum. We use this for La Mesita. However, it's not always used within the community itself, but we feel as an organization that it's important to draw attention to this issue. We want to welcome you all, and as for those of you that have been to our webinars before, you might already know, but for those of you who are new, we try to keep these fairly interactive. We will have times during the presentation for you all to unmute and speak your questions, but you can also always chat in your questions. I will be monitoring the chat, and if there are natural stopping points, I will ask them of Dr. Laura Gonzalez. So please send those in as we're going through the presentation. For El Futuro staff, a reminder, if you are getting credits for being here, or you're gonna take credits for being here, please remember to clock out and then clock back in for your paychecks. We want to say a big thank you to Greensboro AHEC, who are our partners in providing the free continuing education credits for this webinar. You will be receiving a survey about this webinar after today. And so once you complete that, you will be sent your credits from Greensboro AHEC. Want to also bring this to your attention. Today is the last day to register for our prolonged exposure training with Dr. Edna Foa, who is the originator of this evidence-based treatment for PTSD. It will be a virtual training that will take place April 9th through the 11th. You can find more information on our network at la-mesita.mn.co. And a big thank you to Duke University Health System, who have partnered with us and are sponsoring this training. So we're going to start off with some quick polls now. Just checking on the numbers, they're still going up. You'll see this pop up on your screen, and this will just give our speaker a good idea of who is in the webinar with us today. So first, we'll start off with your location. It's always nice to see where folks are joining us from across the state or outside of North Carolina. So if you're outside, you can also select the outside and then let us know in the chat where you are located. And also, Sophia had put the link to register for the prolonged exposure training in the chat if you were wanting a quick way to get there. And there we go. So a lot of triangle, but we've got the whole state covered, which is really nice. And everyone from NC, which is also really nice to see. So next, we're going to ask for what best describes your discipline or position. I've got some options there on the poll, but if not, please hit the other if these things don't cover what you do, and then put them in the chat for us. And Suzanne, I think you can just scroll up on the chat and the link should be there for the PE training.
Not when you come in late. So if anybody comes in late, you need to put it in the chat because you can't see it. Yeah.
Okay. We will.
I just put it in again, so we should be good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So So I think we can publish the results on the poll. So got a nice spread: social workers, counselors, school-based folks, we have some psychiatrists in primary care, community advocates, and then got some students, some psychologists as well. All right, and then the last one, kind of related to the topic, not kind of, it is related to the topic of our talk today. How well equipped would you say you feel to counsel Latinx students on reaching their higher education goals? And we can go ahead and publish. So quite a spread. I selected a little. So for those of us who are not as well informed as we'd like to be, we have a great presentation today from Dr. Gonzalez, whose life work has focused on this, and should also be sharing some really great resources from the website that her lab has developed to help us in supporting our Latinx students. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Gonzalez. So Laura is, and I'll call her Laura because Laura was the first person I worked with in research when I joined UNCG for my clinical psychology PhD. I still remember sitting around that table going over qualitative results from interviews from families around these issues. So Laura is the associate professor in the teacher education and higher ed department at UNCG. In terms of teaching, she covers student development theories at both the master's and doctorate levels, has a focus on equity in higher education, life design, and what effects this has on college students. And she coordinates the doctoral program in higher ed. Her work has shifted from what I described earlier, from kind of describing and understanding these barriers to creating and implementing programs and interventions that are more on the ground and able to help directly. And her research interests focus around educational access for students from Latinx immigrant families, including interventions that empower parents in college access tasks and resources for mixed status families. I'm just really excited to have Laura here and for her to share her expertise in these wonderful resources with you all. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Laura. You can share from your end.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Prandoni. I want to mention that my scholarly background also includes degrees in counseling. And so for those of you who are coming from the counseling, social work, psychology realm of social sciences, I definitely have a lot of respect and appreciation and some understanding for that line of work. Although I am currently in higher education, I definitely approach it from this human development, wellness and potential point of view. And my work with Dr. Prandoni's mentor, Dr. Gabriela Leva-Stein, has also meant that I'm really interested in kind of the intersection of how higher education aspirations can impact our mental health and impact the wellness not only of individuals, but families and communities. So I'm really hopeful that there will be places where our work informs each other. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation with you all today. As Dr. Prandoni said, my topic is So Much Potential, Latinx Students and Higher Education. So just to make sure that we all are on the same page as far as what we'll be working on and doing together today, I hope that by the end of this workshop, we will be able to describe both the assets and the barriers to college access for students from Latinx immigrant families. And then to really focus in on the subset of families that might have mixed status in terms of an undocumented family member, somebody with a temporary status like DACA, or people who were born here and have permanent legal status. So we're going to kind of dive in and think about additional challenges to college access for the subset of families that have that kind of mixed legal status. And then finally, we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about resources available to support educational pathways of students from mixed status families across North Carolina. I am currently living in the Triad here in Greensboro, but my PhD was from NC State. And so I also spent a fair amount of time in the Triangle. So I know those two communities somewhat, but I'm also really interested in thinking together with those of you who are not in the Triangle and Triad about what resources are available to folks in rural areas, in small towns across our state. So I want you to also feel included in the conversation. Okay, so given that you are here participating in the La Mesita network, I'm assuming that there is some level of exposure and knowledge about Latinx immigrant families. So I'm just going to go over a few things that to me seem relevant for our topic today, and I'm going to just sort of surface them up in our attention, not assuming that you don't already know, but just kind of reminding us of the importance of some of these characteristics of the Latinx community in North Carolina. So here in North Carolina, 41% of our Latinx population are foreign-born or newcomers to the US, which is a higher percentage than the national average. So all that is to say, if we think about states like Florida or Texas or California, where there are generations and generations of presence of Latinx families, North Carolina is a little different. So we are an emerging immigrant state according to kind of demographic categories. And so that means that we will see more folks that are kind of still learning and acculturating to US culture, maybe still acquiring bilingualism. And so that is relevant to our topic because they also may have less experience with educational systems in our country. In addition, as I mentioned previously, we're also going to really think about what is it like to live in a mixed status family. So approximately 40% of North Carolina's immigrant population was characterized as undocumented in 2016. And I really want to underscore approximately because it's difficult to get really precise numbers. For logical reasons, people may not wish to disclose their status. But if we think about approximately 40% that may be undocumented, we can think about households that are likely then to have, for example, non-citizen adults or parents living together with younger folks who may have been born here and may be citizens. Sometimes it's also the case that even siblings within the same household will have different statuses and thus differential access to things like education, but even like, healthcare or access to kind of social safety net programs. So this can definitely create tensions and difficulties for both the citizens and the non-citizens within a household. We also just want to spend a minute thinking about sort of what financial resources do Latinx immigrant families in North Carolina have. So some of the ways we can think about this include only a little bit more than half of Latinx adults in North Carolina have health insurance. So that certainly is relevant for those of you who are working in healthcare settings, but it also kind of gives us a sense of if people have to take the financial means they have and cover their basic needs first, so food, shelter, and health and wellness, that may mean less money left over for things like education, which could then be seen as not essential, but sort of additional costs that there may or may not be bandwidth to cover. Another way for us to think about financial status is that the median household income for Latinx immigrant families in 2018, which again, I want to emphasize was pre-COVID, was about $40,000. And given that household size can be, small, medium to large, I think we can all agree that $40,000 doesn't stretch very far. And certainly since COVID, I think we can assume that the financial stress and strain on families is greater. And then lastly, about 37% of children in Latinx immigrant families in North Carolina experience poverty. So food insecurity, difficulties getting basic needs met. So all of that is frustrating, heartbreaking, relevant to the work you do, whether you're in a school, in a mental health capacity, in a physical health center, working as an advocate. And I'm glad to know that I'm part of this community where all of us are trying our best to support and uplift and provide resources to these families. And then finally, as we think about sort of the educational legacy of adults in Latinx immigrant families, that matters because youth maybe then have access to or less access to role models or guides that can help them discern their way forward along the educational pathway. So for example, about 15% of Latinx immigrant adults aged 25 and over have a college degree of some type in North Carolina, whereas 40% of Latinx adults aged 25 or over are without a GED or a high school diploma. I want to qualify those statistics by saying that these numbers would include, for example, an adult who lived most of their life in another country and then came here as an adult seeking work. And so this includes, for example, if I had moved to North Carolina as a 30-year-old looking for better financial and work opportunities, I might be included in this statistic. So it's not just people who have aged up through the educational system in North Carolina, but anyone who's present in the country who is age 25 and older. That said, though, I do think we can think about the ways that this might leave some adult heads of Latinx immigrant families a little bit at a loss as far as exposure to the US educational system, understanding of its complexities and how it works, or tools to really guide the young people in their families along the path toward educational access. So that's not to say that education is not valued in immigrant families. I very strongly believe and have seen evidence that it is. But this is just to say, if we don't have information or the lived experiences ourselves with the US educational system, then we might need some assistance in just decoding and understanding that educational system. This graph I drew from a study to just kind of give us a little bit of additional perspective on educational attainment. So again, they use the term Hispanic in this particular study, but if we think about 27% of Latinx adults having some sort of post-secondary degree or a non-degree credential. So that number is a little bit higher because it can include people who have gone to community colleges to get technical certificates or other non-degree credentials. So it's a little bit higher, but we still see, compared to other racial and ethnic groups present in our state, that it's on the lower end. This data was drawn from 2016, so certainly the numbers could have gone up a little bit in the last 5 years. And as the young people who are born in North Carolina, who are citizen children of immigrant households, age up into educational attainment or college age, that will also cause these numbers to go up. So this is skewed a little bit because it's focusing on our newcomer adults and not taking into account yet the tremendous number of citizen children who will be moving into college age. So I want to take a minute just to acknowledge my bias towards education. Not only do I work in the School of Education at UNCG, I'm just sort of like a lifelong learner. I think there are many, many ways in which education in its many forms can be of benefit to us. Now, I also want to acknowledge that not everybody in the world has to go to a 4-year college. I'm also not trying to influence anybody to say that they must attend the school where I happen to work. But I do want us to just think for a minute about some of the ways that gaining a post-secondary credential of some type can be of benefit to folks. So in addition to the ways that we think about it as having benefit for earning potential, career advancement, financial stability, not only for the individual getting the degree, but for their family. So those are some of the tangible benefits of going to college that we can think about. But I think some of the things that we don't think about as often include greater indices of health, wellness, and hopefulness. So this is a way that having furthered one's educational indicators can also have impact on mental health and wellness. We see greater opportunities. We may be more engaged in the community around us, greater potential for civic engagement, and also for kind of contributing with purpose to our communities. And I think going to college can also just broaden out our social network. And so it can give us a chance to connect and link up with people who can make a positive difference in our lives, in our families' lives, and in our communities' lives. So simultaneously, I'm not saying everybody in the world has to go to college, but I am saying that if you work with a young person or even a not so young person who has expressed an interest in the idea of furthering their education, there are reasons for us to encourage them along that pathway. Now, the pathway to college for Latinx immigrant families, the group that we're talking about today, does include some barriers, but I think we also do a disservice if we don't mention the strengths and the assets that families bring along that path. Especially, I think, in the last 4 years, we had way too much negative discourse in public spaces about immigrants in general and about Latinx immigrants in particular. So I really want to start by focusing on assets. Many times immigrants come to the US sometimes from push factors trying to escape a negative set of circumstances in their home country, but also sometimes for pull factors that they want to open the door to more opportunity, whether that's educational opportunity, opportunity for freedoms, opportunity for work and financial stability. And so we should not at all neglect to note the great motivation that is often present in immigrant families, and the facts that students often really internalize that aspiration of their families and want to make their families proud and want to kind of validate and respect the sacrifices that their families made to bring them to the US. That often also translates into a really strong desire to make a difference and be a contributing member of one's family and community. So those are really powerful motivational assets that are often present in many Latinx immigrant families. That said, we're also today going to just acknowledge that there are barriers, some of which we've just mentioned, including if you don't know as many people in your social network that have been through the educational system in the US, you just have fewer ways to gain knowledge about that, and maybe less exposure to educational mentors or guides. It's also the case that there may be fewer financial resources for newcomers or for people who may not have legal status and therefore may have fewer options for work. And so the legal status question for undocumented folks, there are also fewer educational options or more constraints on their educational options.
Laura, just have a quick question from the chat.
Yeah.
Becca Tate asks, where do trade school degrees fit in with these benefits of higher ed that you've mentioned?
Yeah, so like community college certificates, for example, are relatively inexpensive and often have the benefit of really bolstering people's earning potential. And so I think for students who come from families where financial constraints are very real, that can be sort of a great starting place to feel like you are kind of able to progress your knowledge and skill towards a trade or a job or a position that lets you learn more, lets you kind of develop and improve yourself, but also benefit your family in terms of your earning potential and in a way that hopefully carries less cost. And I also know that, well, for me at least, I feel like it's never too late to keep moving along an educational pathway. So I think if somebody does get a trade certificate or an associate's degree even, that doesn't have to be the stopping point. That can be like one step. And then maybe people need to work for a while to build up their financial resources again. And then if they wish to still continue on to other points along the educational pathway. But I know that for Latinx immigrants in particular, community colleges are oftentimes a first choice, having the benefits of being close to family, not meaning you have to move away, being flexible in terms of it's possible to take those kinds of classes, but still have a job and still be contributing to the family's financial well-being. So community colleges are a great option. And hopefully that was what Becca was asking. I apologize if I missed the central point of that.
No, I think that was it. I think it's like in terms of like, I think also, I guess I'm wondering personally, like, do you know of a difference in the research between like the health benefits that are received by someone that goes to kind of a community college or gets an associate versus, you know, the 4-year and beyond?
Yeah. So I think benefits, you know, there's always kind of the weighing of the pluses and minuses. So certainly a 4-year college carries with it greater cost, so greater kind of upfront financial cost, even though there's the possibility of greater future earnings. So you can think of it as an investment, but it does require more resources kind of in the upfront stages. Whereas community college maybe has a lower kind of entry cost burden and can incrementally improve the kind of financial prospects and just that sense of kind of contribution and engagement and sort of civic membership that one has when you feel like you're able to do some good work, contribute to the community around you, improve the life for your family. And actually later on, I'm going to read to you a little bit of a sort of a testimonial from an individual who completed an associate's degree and then is still working on a bachelor's degree, but they kind of talked about the intermediary benefits of having gained that associate's degree first.
Thank you.
So because today I really want to spend a little bit of time thinking particularly about families who do have mixed legal status, two of the issues that I'd like for us to think about together are, what does it mean to be required to pay out-of-state tuition? So, so far, 16 states in this country have passed tuition equity laws, which allow a high school graduate to pay in-state tuition. So I think, to me, that seems like a really logical thing to do, to say, okay, if you've lived here long enough that you've moved through high school and graduated, you've been, you know, paying sales taxes, contributing to your community, that we should consider you as a member of an in-state student. Unfortunately, North Carolina is not one of those 16 states. We have been trying though. So North Carolina and several other states have introduced such legislation, and in our case, even a couple of times, but it has not passed quite yet. The impact of that then is even a student who has been registered in North Carolina, has enrolled in North Carolina schools from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, but do not have legal permanent status, would be categorized as out-of-state students in terms of tuition. And just to give you a sense of what difference that can make, at UNCG, our in-state tuition for a full-time semester, so just one semester as a full-time student, the tuition is $2,200. That same semester of full-time coursework as an out-of-state student is $9,800. So it's, you know, several times more. And if we think about immigrant families who may already be worried about their financial resources and worried about being able to cover the basic needs of their family, the difference between $2,200 and $9,800 is enormous. So that out-of-state tuition problem is real. And if any of you are interested in advocacy efforts, I'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about North Carolina's advocacy around that issue. The other thing for us to think about is that even youth who were born in the United States, born here in North Carolina, who are citizen students, but who might have undocumented parents or siblings, may sometimes opt out of the process of moving into post-secondary because they're worried about unintended consequences for their undocumented family members. So they might be concerned that by applying for admission or by applying for a financial aid, that they may have to disclose family members' lack of status to, you know, to the government in the case of financial aid through the FAFSA, or to kind of local authorities in the case of just applying for admission. And that can be really a scary prospect. And so even some students who would be eligible for admission, eligible for in-state tuition, eligible for financial aid, may not move forward with applying just because of their fears about what it could mean for their family members. And I know that that dynamic also is the case in healthcare, that there are people who are eligible for physical and mental health services or social safety nets who just may not come forward to access those resources because of their worry about how it could negatively impact family members. So I know I've been talking for quite a bit, and this is one of those moments where I'd like to just stop and see and hear from some of you all if you're interested in chatting. So based on your life experience, your personal connections, your work experiences, let's just think together for a minute about what do we think we know about the experience of being undocumented or having a temporary status like DACA? And after we kind of think together about that, then I think the second question is, what do we think they need from us as helping professionals and educators? So I'll just stop for a sec and see if anybody wants to share their knowledge and experience.
I'll invite folks to either type in the chat or unmute at this time.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jandira Zaki, and I am with El Futuro. I was one of the ones like, I don't really know anything about the education for higher education. But one of the things that I've had with when I was an intern at a high school with Latinx students, as well as just my own personal friends and peers, there's that once they realized or they find out in high school that they are undocumented because either their family members haven't told them or they've just known that, hey, I've lived here all my life. There's what's the point of doing well in college or doing well in high school? What's the point of continuing if I can't go to college? And that this is one of the reasons where I've been wanting to attend this, because I'm like, there are options, there are ways, even though there are a lot of obstacles, there are ways, but I couldn't provide more information than that. But just giving them that sense of hope, and then again knowing that a lot of them go through that fear of like, what's the point? And then they start doing low in their grades, they stop attending high school. But those are one of my personal experiences that I've had.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jandira. And again, I think that really points to that intersection between like educational possibilities and mental health, that it can be really crushing, especially for a young person who thought they had X, Y, and Z set of options, and then learned that those are severely curtailed. I agree with you, the options are not zero, but I think it can feel like a door being slammed in your face. And it takes a little while for people to kind of recover from that disappointment to start looking for windows. Like, okay, the door might be closed, but where else can I find some openings? So I am happy that we will be able to share some of those resources in just a few minutes here.
And to piggyback off of that, I'm pretty good at helping them navigate how to get post-secondary education. But then if they're undocumented, what are their employment opportunities? They can't study nursing because they can't sit for the licensure exam. So that's been my struggle. I work in high school.
Yeah, thank you very much, April. That definitely is true, that it's not, again, a wide open door. There are other professions like nursing that have licensure requirements that might require somebody to have a social security number or be a citizen. And so people might need to take their interest in healthcare, for example, and sort of move in a different direction to a way that they can work and contribute and that does not require licensure like nursing.
We have quite a few comments. I'm sorry if I can't quite get to all of them, but I think folks are kind of echoing that sometimes it's difficult to know how to help folks because they're reluctant about sharing their status, or some feel like it's very limited. We might, Brenna says, we may wrongly think that there are not financial opportunities out there. And I know that you'll be sharing some later on, Laura, which is really great. Lack of materials that are bilingual or interpreter services in those advocacy spaces can also be really difficult. And Jessica, I wonder if I can ask you to share your experience, because she's talking about being a first-generation college student and the difficulty of filling out college applications. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Jessica, but.
No, you're good. I'm Jessica. I'm a therapist at El Futuro. And this presentation is just really hitting home because as a first-generation college student myself, I remember the struggles of applying to colleges and not really knowing how to do anything because my parents only spoke Spanish. No one in my family really knew or had done that process before. So it's just really hitting home. But thank you for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I really I appreciate your will to make a way out of difficulty. So like, I know that the pathway forward when it's beset by barriers and problems can be really exhausting. And yet I have worked with students like you who have still found a way, which is truly amazing. And I think also calls those of us who are educators, advocates, and helpers to think about what can we do to help clear some of those barriers out of the way so that it doesn't have to be so exhausting and frustrating for the individuals, for the young folks who are walking that pathway.
I think several others in the
I
feel the same way. Sorry, Gwendolyn, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I wanted to make a comment, and I've been trying to put in the chat, ask a question about scholarships, but for some reason it wouldn't let me send. But I used to work at Wake County DSS and downstairs, and we had a section where it was available for Hispanics population, and they were very helpful in helping them with applications, resources for their family. So DSS is a huge asset to individuals who's trying to get resources such as food stamps, I want to say WIC program. So they were very helpful. I was a social worker there. They had a section just for the that population. That was my comment. And then my the second thing was a question: is scholarships available for the population?
Yeah, we at the end of the slides, I'm going to move to a website and show you where you can learn about those kinds of resources. And I appreciate you talking about I think it is definitely the case that within some of the agencies where we work, there might be like one or two people who like happen to be bilingual or happen to be immigrants themselves, and thus like out of just caring and passion for the population kind of take up the charge to kind of provide the additional outreach and support to immigrants and or undocumented immigrants. And I often find that once you know one of those people, then they're part of a network of like, who is that bilingual or, immigrant advocate person in this agency or this agency. And so I think sometimes tapping into one of those people then helps you learn about the sort of, I don't want to say underground, but this seldom seen network of immigrant advocates. And this is important to me as I said in the beginning, as someone who has lived and worked in both the Triad and the Triangle, but thinking about the parts of our state that are not the Triad and Triangle and not Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, that are, I'm really interested in helping folks in those areas think about like, what can you do via web to try to tap into that network of helpers? How can you kind of get the students and families you're working with connected with those folks, even if you look around your community and may not find those kind of bilingual advocates or immigrant advocates very easily?
I'll just pipe in for a minute before you move on. I'm Suzanne. I work in the western part of the state in Buncombe County. And we just did several people on this that helped us out with our FAFSA night are in this presentation. And we offered an English and a Spanish version. And we reached out at CFNC has a wonderful, in our part of the state, Spanish representative, Dr. Juanes Ramirez, who's on here. We used our ELL staff, UNC Asheville staff, and provided that session all in Spanish and with people who know the nuts and bolts and are experts in working with students, like you're talking about with mixed statuses. And I realize, federal student aid sites have a lot of resources and posters that are also in Spanish, as does CFNC. Lots of resources. So really partnering with your community agencies has worked for us. And I work at the central office, but when I was school-based, I agree, it's heartbreaking. But working and building your resources about what's out there, what schools cater to students, reach out to students that are international students with scholarships, Latinx community, and just building those resources. And yeah, so that's what we did. And we were pleased with our efforts and want to continue and grow on that for our community.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That's a great example of knowing your resources. I'm happy to know Dr. Ramirez is with us on the webinar today. And then just, I think it also starts with the awareness of, okay, great, if we're doing a FAFSA night, will everyone be able to access this information, or do we need to think about additional populations like having materials or presentations in Spanish or other ways that we need to reach out to folks? So I really thank and appreciate you for that awareness and for taking the extra steps to be inclusive in your FAFSA night. That's awesome.
Thank you all. I think we'll take one more question from Alice, and then we'll let you move on with the presentation, Laura.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Alice Franks. She, her, hers. I'm a therapist in the UNCG Counseling Center. Actually, one of the things that I think a lot about is how terrified students are when they come in, because they don't know if we're going to be an arm of the government and reporting status. And so really reassuring students a couple of ways. One, just talking about the limits of confidentiality, but also I think about what I put in my notes. I'm not going to put things about the documentation status of family members because I don't always know what the government may pull on me. I'm willing to fight it out and go to court, but I'm careful about what I put in my notes. And then I think the other way that I can let students know that I'm not there to be the documentation police is talking about some of the grassroots organizers in the community. And, because particularly when the ICE raids were really ramped up, they were just so terrified and thinking about dropping out of school to be home and keep their families safe, or just to try to help navigate. And so, I connect them with Siembra or Faith Action, which are two groups in town, and just talk about some of the people I know working in those organizations, and then making sure that my colleagues and I are all talking about that, as well as campus resources. But that's just kind of one-on-one in the office, just trying to help people know that we're not there to try to punish them or go after them, and that we really want to support them. And that even if we're not experiencing it directly, the terror of having a target on your family's back, and just really trying to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alice. And I really feel like, again, not only does that point to like the intersection between educational aspirations and like mental health stressors, but also points to the fact that it sort of requires all of us, right? That it kind of takes a village to address the variety of concerns that students from mixed status families will have. So, not just help finding a scholarship and not just, assistance in figuring out like, how do I start with a college application? What are the steps? What does this look like? But also, caring and reassurance and support around the fears, the very genuine fears of what is it like for me and my family to have a target on our back, like you were saying, so that it requires kind of multiple sources of support to get through the difficulties, I think.
Thank you all so much for your questions and comments.
Yeah.
I think we can keep going, and then we'll, if we didn't get to your questions, please save them. We'll have plenty of other opportunities for more conversation.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna play a quick video that also kind of helps us hear directly from some undocumented student voices. I'm gonna start.
I've had people kick me out of their cars before, people stop being my friends. I've had really good dates go really badly after I tell them that I'm undocumented.
I was born in the state of Morelos in Mexico.
I'm from Ecuador.
I was born in Guadalajara, Mexico.
I was born in Ecuador.
DACA is an executive order that allows immigrants who came as children to work legally for 2 years. My parents brought me at the age of 4 back in 1999.
So I was 7 years old when I came to this country.
I was 4 years old when I came to the US.
I was 11 years old when I came to this country.
I came here when I was a couple months old.
Middle school, I was the best student in my middle school. So I kept on receiving offers to go study abroad. I was like, oh, I want to go and I want to go. But then it was in the sense of like my parents were like, you can't go. Because if you go, you'll never be able to come back.
It was around like 12 that I was having an argument with my father, just saying that you're undocumented. Like, you're never going to work anywhere, you're never gonna go to college, like you're gonna be nothing. And that was when I found out that I was undocumented.
If you're not, let's say, an A-straight student, you're not an amazing student that stands out in your school, then it's really hard to find scholarships because, each scholarship has a requirement. And many undocumented students are not able to do so because they, have to sometimes provide for themselves. They have to go work full-time and then go to school.
My family and I have always lived in constant fear, especially of deportation, right? Like, my dad has worked multiple jobs where he's experienced raids, and so he kind of just has to run and escape those. And I've had uncles who've been deported. I've had cousins who've been in detention centers. So that's a constant fear that we've had since day one.
We don't use the word illegal because that kind of just, it's kind of offensive because it's it's not who we are. We prefer being called undocumented.
Yes, I consider the United States my home, and I think that if I was sent back to Mexico, I would feel very alienated. Although I do speak the language and I know a lot of the culture, and I'm proud of my Mexican heritage and I love Mexico, but it would not feel the same.
We have to come together and realize that the issue is bigger than paperwork, legalization, and citizenship. This is about human rights. This is about validating our existence to those that don't believe that we should be here.
I contribute to the community, and that's something I'm very proud of, regardless of citizenship, regardless of race, sexuality.
There's no such thing as a good or a bad migrant. We just are.
I just wanted to share that as a way to also give us a little bit more first-person perspective on many of the things that you've already been talking about in terms of worry for family and stress and struggle, and also being told, no, you can't, no, you won't, kind of the negative messages, the barriers that undocumented students receive often.
I've had people kick me out of their cars.
Okay, next slide. So this is a narrative that I'm going to read for you in just a second. But before I do, I wanted to just take a quick minute to tell you about how I came to be doing these interviews. So my, as you have been listening to me talk and watching me in this webinar, you probably have figured out that I am white. I am a Scot-Irish German American, 5th or 6th generation. And it's my husband who is the real Gonzalez in the family. And he is an immigrant from Panama who is a recently naturalized US citizen. So my interest in college access for Latinx immigrant families certainly has a personal link to my husband's experiences and sort of learning about what his journey to the US and through the educational system here was like. And at the time when I was meeting him and coming to know him, that was also one of the points in time in North Carolina's history where we were experiencing a big increase in immigrant newcomers. And so the state was kind of wrestling with some of the issues that I've heard you all voice today in terms of, gosh, our school doesn't have any ESL program or teachers, or our hospital or our clinic doesn't have translators, doesn't have interpreters. We don't have our materials available in languages other than English. And so our state was really, I guess, a little bit caught off guard. We did not have many immigrant newcomers prior to that decade from 1990 to 2000. And so as I was watching our state sort of wrestle with, wow, how do we welcome and work in a supportive and adequate way with these newcomers, that sort of sparked in me an interest to be part of the solution in any way that I could. And then I mentioned earlier my connection with Dr. Leva Stein and with her wonderful students like Dr. Prandoni. So my interest in college access is both personal and professional, and has certainly also been embedded in the life experiences that have been shared with me by immigrants in our state. So this particular research was in an effort to advocate with the decision makers in our state. So given the fact that we've had these multiple efforts to have tuition equality, tuition equity in our state, and that so far they have not passed the legislature, I really thought about the fact that many of these people making these decisions probably have never talked to somebody who has DACA, has a temporary status, or has no legal status. And so I felt like something I could do as a researcher was to sort of be a bridge in between the voices and the experiences of those people who are most directly impacted by these issues and the people whose decisions are affecting their lives. So I did these interviews with assistance of some great collaborators, and knowing that these words might be a little bit small on your screen, I'm just going to read some of them out loud to kind of help us think about both the stressors and the strengths of young adults with temporary or no legal status living in our state. So what Jay, which is a pseudonym, what Jay shared was, what I've experienced is that it is really difficult living with a temporary status. I myself, I have DACA, and I was able to get an associate's degree, but it was really difficult because you have to find ways to try to go to school. I went to a local community college before I started school, and they were trying to charge me out-of-state tuition. It was really expensive. So you always find roadblocks along your journey. I feel like not having a status or having a limited status, it's really like, I guess, finding yourself in a maze. You take one way, thinking that's the way out, and you follow it until you can no longer get through anymore. Then you have to get through it backwards, take another route, and you advance a little bit more, but then there's another roadblock. You know what I mean? I guess I picture a maze where you never know when it's going to be the end, and you're not going to be able to do anything for yourself anymore. I'm a nurse. I care for America's citizens in the worst days of their lives. Because I work in a unit with patients who are really sick, I save people's lives. I would like people to know that immigrants are part of the community. We're part of this country. And I mean, just like me, immigrants can contribute so much. All we want to do is succeed and do good things. If they could allow scholarships, then they could allow students to be a part of the country because we could help the country a lot. I was able to go to school, and now I'm contributing more to the economy. I was able to buy a vehicle. I was able to get a house. I know there are a lot of young people out there who want to go to school, but they just really can't afford it with the out-of-state tuition problem. And if they can only allow us to go to school, I mean, we really don't ask for much. Just let us go to school. We'll pay for it. I've paid for my school. I mean, education changes everything. A career changes everything. So I share this with you in part so that we can really hear in a first person voice the passion to contribute and the desire for, you know, purposeful work and a chance to improve, and not asking for handouts, but just asking for an opportunity for the door to be opened a little bit so that people can sort of make good on their desire to be to make contributions. And also, I think this really speaks to the frustration of feeling like you're in a maze and you never know when's the next time that you're going to hit a roadblock and be stopped. So it was information like these interviews that really helped to heighten my resolve to provide some resources and to be of assistance in any way that I could. I won't read this whole interview, but one of the things that I felt was really important about this one was Jack said, I had to work really hard at it, but I got a job and my job sponsored me to be able to pay in-state tuition. So that was the reason why I was able to get an education. So it's not that I gave up in actions. It's just more so how I felt, which was discouraged. I still think it's very unfortunate that it's still happening. And that's why I agreed to do this interview. Because, you know, it's unbelievable that some of the kids now just don't go to school and are growing up not able to get an education simply because of a paper. Looking back, I was fortunate to have friends really go out of the way to help me, like getting jobs in the second or third shift so I could still be able to go to college. But, you know, I'm just fortunate that in the midst of it all, there's still good people out there. However, in-state tuition would mean everything. So Jack goes forward to say, like, I hope leaders change their minds. I hope they realize that they can actually influence this, and that all we're asking for is to have a fair shot. So I guess then I would like for us to think together about how are we as educators and advocates doing at responding to the kinds of questions and concerns that we just heard through the video and through those two narratives. Here's one more quote from a different one of those interviews that I did. This individual said, I had applied to several colleges and I was getting accepted into all of them because my GPA was high. But because of my status, they weren't able to help me financially. Yes, my school counselor did try to help me, but he wasn't trained to help me. He never expected to encounter a student with limited to no status, and he didn't know what to do. It was mainly through friends and advocacy groups in the community that I was able to get resources and information. Honestly, I've known a lot of people that just give up. They feel there is no point to continue, and they have so much potential. So I think this, especially that last quote, so much potential, which is the name of the website that I helped to pull together in response, I realized that it's true that school counselors, teachers, social workers, counselors, psychologists, most of us don't have as part of our training an understanding of how to work with clients who have limited to no status. And so if we can bolster the ability of our professional communities to have access to those resources and information and to kind of follow through maybe on their best intentions, I do believe that most educators would want to try to help students in these situations, but they just don't have the perspectives, the tools, and the information to do so. So I don't know, Juan, if you want us to chat a little bit about kind of how we think educators and advocates are doing, or to kind of move forward to sharing the resources.
I think we can share the resources,
Okay.
and we'll have maybe a longer Q&A after you get through the website, because I think
Okay.
folks in the chat are really hungry for these resources that you've been
Awesome.
previewing for everyone.
Okay, so this is just an image of the website, So Much Potential, and my kind of encouragement that if in any way we assess our professions as not doing as well as we could, this is just an encourager to let's do better. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen so that I can move over to the website itself. Wait a minute. Nope, that's not it. Okay, hold on. This will just take me a second to get to the right place.
And Sophia put the website in the chat for you
Oh,
all,
awesome. Thank you.
as well.
Okay, I think this should be it.
Yep, you're there.
Okay, awesome. Let me see if I can maximize. Okay. So what I'd like to do then is just kind of walk us through the sections of this website. You will see that it addresses some of the main parts of college planning and college access, such as admissions, financial aid, some resources for the various parts of our state. And then the planning and delivering section, I think, is mainly for if you are working in a school setting. But I want to click on start here for a minute, just to kind of help us get in the mindset of if you are, for example, an advocate, an immigrant advocate, and you're working in a space, whether it's a school or a clinic, where there is misinformation and misperceptions, which I do believe is kind of rampant. This is a way for us to kind of self-educate and kind of do a checkup so that we know that we are not doing harm. And I kind of put a reminder down here of like ethical practice requires us to do no harm, right? So whether you're an educator or a mental health professional, increasing our understanding of accurate terms and definitions related to what is DACA, what does it mean to be undocumented or to have permanent legal status, temporary status, adjustment of status, that it's really important for us to kind of do the work that is needed to make sure that we have accurate understandings. And then these misunderstandings, I think we hear sometimes from our colleagues, but sometimes we also hear these from students. So for example, students might say to us, well, I can't go to college because I don't have a social security number. And so if we know enough to say, no, can't isn't the correct word. It's not as easy perhaps, but admissions policies differ from state to state and also among institutional types. So private, public, 4-year, 2-year. So it is a narrow path forward, but it is not accurate to say that you can't go at all or that you can't get financial aid. So again, the FAFSA, which is one of the main sort of arteries whereby people access aid, does depend on having a social security number, but there are private aid sources that do not, or there are sources like churches, private organizations, foundations that may have opportunities that students can access without having a social security number. Sometimes people, through experiences of discrimination and bias might just feel discouraged and might just feel, well, maybe college isn't for me or isn't for people like me. So I think reminding folks that there are lots of different kinds of educational opportunities like we've talked about. There's technical programs at community colleges all the way up through very competitive private colleges. So I think rather than saying, for example, like, oh, I couldn't go to a place like Duke or Wake Forest, we can help students see like all the many different types of educational opportunities and to think about finding one that is more of a match for them. I think I do want to caution us that we've talked a lot about the financial difficulties that folks in immigrant families may experience. And so we have to be careful not to suggest to a student that, oh, don't worry about that, just go to college, it's a great investment. Sure, it is an investment, but students and their families are the ones that get to make the decision about whether that investment, the cost of that investment is one that they can afford at the moment or not. So we can help students sort of think creatively about ways to balance part-time work, part-time studies, or kind of saving and working for a year and then studying for a year. We can help them think about ways to balance the needs of their families and their educational aspirations. But we would not want to disregard the important needs of the students and their families. And then this is just a way to kind of remind us that we can also connect our students with role models, community members who are kind of walking in the same steps, so that even if we may not know that many people ourselves with DACA or without documents, we do a great service to folks by helping them to connect with other people in a community who can also encourage and inspire them. I also just want to mention down at the bottom of the screen here that there are these kind of insider tips and strategies related to both admissions and financial aid. So I'm just going to share those with us real quick. This comes from, and I want to again shout out to Dr. Ramirez with CFNC. These insider tips come from the tireless work of advocates who have, in light of the fact that the door is closed, looked for all the ways that windows can be opened, all the ways that people can kind of get around the barriers that are in their pathways. So I've kind of compiled some of those like hard-earned lessons of practice here. For example, if a student has Mexican heritage, the Mexican consulate can help them explore taking online courses from Mexican universities, or exploring articulation agreements between the community college system and the UNC system is the one I know the best, but there are other four-year colleges that have articulation agreements. There are ways that we can help to encourage and inspire students who may be feeling discouraged about their opportunities by letting them know about some summer programs or camps that are specific for Latinx students or immigrant students. We can help them find other similar peers in networks like the Crosby Scholars or Latino Achiever programs. Our state does have great advocacy organizations such as El Pueblo, Adelante, and C. CFNC is kind of one of my main go-to information spaces as well. There are college access workshops and fairs sponsored by Latinx related organizations. So like the North Carolina Society of Hispanic Professionals is a great one they've hosted these fairs for a long time. And so even if you feel like you don't have all the answers, being able to point students to these kinds of networks and opportunities can be a great way to help provide the information and encouragement that they're needed. Similarly, in terms of financial aid kind of insider tips, there are ways to help students stay organized when they're looking for scholarships, as that can be a place where they have to invest a lot of time and strategies to stay organized. One of the narratives that I read talked about the business scholarship, business sponsorship option. And importantly, the employers can even be a family business. So if I have a parent who owns a tienda, but it's registered as a North Carolina owned business or a North Carolina business, then I can be a sponsor to my child if my child also works in the family business. There are ways that people can earn college credits before leaving high school. So helping them learn about dual enrollment opportunities is a way to help kind of save money later on when you can take college credits for free through high school. There are also even continuing education courses at community colleges, which are not part of a degree program, but can be part of short occupational certificate programs and can cost little to nothing. Some of you may know about the North Carolina Promise program, in which 3 UNC system universities have a $500 per semester for in-state and $2,500 for out-of-state flat rate. And so even though $2,500 is still more than $500, it's a lot less than $9,800. So thinking about these kinds of ways to help people get to a more manageable tuition burden. I do want to say, I know I don't work at a private university, but there are private universities who do assist students, even students without Social Security numbers, because they have kind of deeper pockets and more scholarship funds. Okay. Under the Contact Us link, I just want to give a shout out again to CFNC that they have this 1-800 college planning hotline. And maybe Dr. Ramirez can let us know if there still is the option to leave a message in Spanish and have somebody reply back in Spanish for the college planning hotline. But here is not only the Western rep, Dr. Ramirez, but the Eastern North Carolina Rep Juana Hernandez Urquiza. So these folks are just worth their weight in gold, and will come to your school or will, talk to folks on the phone, and really, because they are serving a particular sector of the state, are much more knowledgeable about the resources and the advocates and the networks in that part of the state. And then you can send me a message if it's more related to questions about what's on the website. But if you want to provide kind of a direct services link, I really recommend the CFNC folks.
Seems like those translation line is ready for students and advocates.
Awesome, thank you. So then, given time, I'm just gonna keep moving through the tabs on the website. So if you're working like in a school setting, or even not in a school setting, but with a student who's kind of pondering admissions, hopefully you've met that student and it's not like spring of their senior year. Hopefully you have a little bit of time to sort of help them think about and plan their way forward. So I sort of have three recommendations here. One is, if you do have lots of time to kind of learn and prepare for working with those students, CFNC has some great webinars that address many different aspects of college admissions, whether it's admissions for community colleges, for four-year colleges, lots of different really informative webinars. So if you know in advance that you might be working with a student with admissions questions, you can watch the webinars, or you can encourage them to watch them. If you have just a little bit of time to prepare for working with students, there's a few websites that have both English and Spanish level language resources. So Big Future is a resource that comes from the College Board. So as a national website that has trustworthy information, and does include a Spanish language portion for parents, and a section about paying for college if you are undocumented. My Undocumented Life can be a great resource to refer to students, because it is more of kind of a grassroots student perspective that includes like blogs and sort of how-tos from the student perspective, like how have we figured out ways to navigate this. There is also part of the website that's directed towards educators and counselors who might be working with undocumented students or DACA recipients. And then CFNC does have the Apply to College in NC link, where you can help students kind of look at a practice application to college. So thinking back to one of the comments earlier from the first generation college students, rather than asking a student to kind of walk that road alone, by looking at the practice application with them, or even in small groups, you can help students be prepared for the kinds of tasks that they might need and have a space to ask questions in and figure out how to move forward in admissions. If you have a student right in front of you, so if you didn't know they were coming in that day to ask you questions about how do I go to college if I have DACA or am undocumented, then I would encourage you to kind of go straight to our FAQs section. So they may directly say something to you like this, like, can I get financial aid if I have DACA? Or should I even submit a FAFSA? Should I disclose my status? What would that do to my parents if I have to put their information on any forms? If I have DACA, do I still go through the residency determination process? So some of these might help you just address immediate questions if you have a student sitting right in front of you. I'm going to move on with the interest of time to the financial aid section. And so here we see, for example, a list of scholarships that are open to students who have DACA or are undocumented. So this, for example, comes from the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. Also, our local YWCA has been keeping a scholarship list and updating it. We also have some of the advocacy organizations I've mentioned throughout, including Adelante, including the North Carolina Society of Hispanic Professionals, including HACU, which is the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. So it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort for students and advocates to sort of look through these and to figure out what they might be eligible for. But I do think it also can give some hope in terms of it's not just the closed door, it's at least a little bit of possibility. And then there are also some answers here to questions that we often get asked about, like, if I'm undocumented, am I eligible for federal student aid? What are the other types of financial aid that might be available if not federal? Are scholarships only for kids with good grades? Do I need to be full-time? Like, can I go to school part-time and still get financial aid? So a lot of great questions about eligibility, and then just some support around the task of completing the FAFSA if students are indeed eligible to use the FAFSA in their search for financial aid. So a lot of information there about the FAFSA and residency determination processes, which are like, even if you're an English-speaking US citizen, this process can still be complicated. And so it has extra layers of complication for folks who are have other situations. And so, taking the time to sort of help people walk through those can be not only encouraging, but sort of give them the tools to navigate their way. We already looked at some of the FAQs, so let me go over to resources. I'm going to start with this Stories from North Carolina Students link. These are some more of those narratives. Like, here's the one I had shared from Jay, and then there are a few others here. Those can be important if you are, let's say, in an area of the state where there aren't that many immigrant students or undocumented students, and maybe students are feeling really isolated, or just need a sense of being able to identify with the story of someone else. These stories can also be powerful, I think, if you are working in a setting, I'll just use a school as an example, where other decision makers need to be convinced of the importance of putting some time or effort or resources towards supporting immigrant students, and particularly students from mixed status families. So anytime you encounter a person whose heart needs to be shifted with some empathy and compassion, I think having these stories is helpful. But I want to just spend a little bit of time here on these North Carolina regional resources. So you could use this drop-down menu to, for example, look specifically in Eastern North Carolina, Western North Carolina. You could look at statewide resources or video resources, or you could just do a search for some keywords. This page is going to just show you kind of everything that is on this resource page. So resources from the Adelante network about paying for college, specific resources from places like Appalachian State, from CFNC and UNCG, the Center for New North Carolinians. So at your leisure, this is a place where you can either browse through and just get a sense of the many resources that are sometimes hidden just under the surface in our state, but do exist. There's also included here some national resources. So like in California, for example, they are, I think, have progressed a little bit further than we have. And so learning from them, for example, about the Dreamer resource centers that they have at some of their universities. So how could that even serve as a model for the kinds of resources that we might want to create here? Some more examples of university-based resources, community-based resources like the Emily Kay Center in Durham, Faith Action, which was mentioned previously. Some resources in Spanish, so a CFNC resource about financial fundamentals. So again, we don't have time to click on all of these, but I hope it encourages you just to see all of these resources here and to know that you can educate yourself, educate your colleagues, but also directly share some of these with students, families, clients who you might be working with. If you know about a resource that you don't find here and you want to let me know about it so that it can be added, I would love that. So please go back to the start here, contact us, and let me know if there are additional resources that you'd like to see added. There's also a special link to the CFNC video library, including both English language videos for service providers and then some Spanish language videos in case students or families might prefer to receive information in Spanish. I know we're at 11:20, and so I want to maybe just stop here in case we want to do a few questions at the end. Would that be good, Juan?
Yeah, I think so. I think,
Okay.
I just want to share a quick comment from Brenna Aritza McCall, who says, this website is everything. I remember doing this work 8 to 9 years ago and passing around spreadsheets with scholarship lists, programs, websites, and info. Having an English-Spanish website that is a hub of information is great. So I think just speaks to like, and I mean, I'm floored by just everything. And people were, I think, sending links to different programs. And we were thinking, okay, let's put together a PDF and we'll send it out after today. But I think the resources page you just shared had pretty much every one of those. And I actually, in the chat, encourage people to message you if there are any resources that they don't see on the website already.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if folks have any questions or comments for Dr. Gonzalez on this resource or any of the things we've covered today, I know there were a number of questions and comments from before that we didn't get to, so please feel free to unmute or type in the chat.
Hi,
While
my
people
name
are
is...
doing that, I'm sorry, I just wanted to put up this part of the website to really acknowledge everyone who helped me do this. I didn't do this all by myself, and so I'm just going to leave this up so that you all can see the folks who worked with me on this website. Sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Scott. Good morning to everyone, and thanks for putting this workshop together. My question is, right now, because of COVID, how can we manage help students get those experiences that they need in order to apply to college? Because in their high school years, they are supposed to be doing some volunteer work, but as I don't know if many are aware, many places are not accepting volunteers. So how can we help students to cover that part? And also for those students who are undecided, they don't know what they want to study, how can we guide them?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of how the college application or access process has been impacted by COVID, I do feel like on the university end, people have already understood that we're going to need to be making allowances. So for example, many colleges have said, you know, we're not going to require the SATs or standardized tests this year because of difficulties accessing testing through COVID. Or if a student describes in their personal statements, you know, the ways that their efforts to either work or volunteer or be engaged in extracurriculars were curtailed because of COVID, I think universities can't possibly hold that against folks. There are some virtual spaces or ways to get people to think about like how they could demonstrate their leadership or how they could make an impact on their community even virtually. But I agree with you that that is a reality that we're living with. And I know that at least at UNCG, that conversation has already been happening amongst the admissions folks. And then I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the second part of your question.
And how can we guide students that are not sure what they want to study? Like they're not sure what they want to do. I know there's admission for those students and they could be undeclared majors, but even though once they get through the 2 years of college and they're still not sure what to do because lack of experience, how can we help students when they are in their high school years to help them take a path? Because some students, due to lack of financial resources, transportation, and programs available in their community, they cannot experience things in order to help them take a path if that's what they would like to study.
Thank you. So I will just again point to CFNC as a critically important resource. And so it talks about helping students kind of apply, pay for, and kind of learn about the college application process. And there are sections of that website, and if Dr. Ramirez wants to unmute and add something too, there are sections of that website that help students do, you know, kind of like interest surveys, and then match those to the types of opportunities that are available at universities around North Carolina. So if a student's interest profile indicates a strong interest in like STEM or technology or engineering, then the CFNC website can also help connect those students to, here are the types of 2-year and 4-year colleges where you might find relevant plans of study. Dr. Ramirez, is there anything else you'd like to say about that part of CFNC?
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. This is amazing. One thing that people don't necessarily think about, but I think is really helpful to think about those professions that we're going to have employment shortage in North Carolina. So thinking about the forgivable education loans for service is a great tool for those students that still need money, but they're still undecided. So if I have an undecided student, I'm always guiding them first through that list. Is there any profession that you can do to help us? Because, you know, we have to think about those shortages in the state. So, but you explain it beautifully. Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez.
Yes.
Thank you. And can I ask the caller to just say your name again so we can give you credit today?
It's Scarlett Herbas.
Carmen, you say your last name?
Scarlett Herbas, like Gone with the Wind, and my last name is Herbas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Gwen, and I wanted to just piggyback off of what I think Ms. Carmen just said. I'm a mental health family-centered therapist, and we are getting a large influx of undocumented families with in this population. And she pointed out the fact that they're still in high school, but they're struggling with schools, local schools, and they're losing interest, and they're even having behavior issues and problems in the home. And that's when we come in and try to help. So, and I think she kept referring to CFNC to help because they're still in high school, but they're sort of isolated and having problems in local schools. And I think she said that maybe that we can refer them to CFNC. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, the College Foundation of North Carolina, cfnc.org. And
Okay.
that is definitely part of the resource section. And even at the beginning under Start Here, where it says contact us, they have that 1-800 number, and the regional representatives, they're kind of Spanish services representatives. But your question actually also reminded me that I hadn't clicked at all on the planning and delivering section of the website. And so here there is, for example, 11 ways you can help support undocumented youth for educators and school support staff. Or from the Department of Education, a much longer resource guide about supporting undocumented youth. I will say that this is an older one because there weren't that many resources coming out of the federal government over the past 4 years. So this is pre that time, but there are still some suggestions and resources that might be useful there. Adelante created a Ensuring College Access for Everyone guide to advising immigrant students. And then there's even sort of a document about how schools can think about helping to allay deportation concerns and keep immigrant students safe at school. So there are things in this section about kind of what can schools do to help encourage, resource, and work effectively with immigrant students and families.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really helpful.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gwen. And I know we're coming right up on the time, and I know there's probably plenty of other questions, but I wonder, Laura, if we can, you can unshare and then we can start to wrap up. And I know folks can also contact you through the website with any follow-up questions.
Yeah, I would just love to say thank you so much to El Futuro and La Mesita for giving me this opportunity to spend time with you all. And if there's anything helpful about the website, my only plea is that you share it. I mean, share it through your social media connections, share it with people you work with, share it with students and families. All I really want for this website is that it's out in the world. And so my deep appreciation to Dr. Prandoni and to El Futuro for helping to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think people echo the gratitude in the chat. People have found this just immensely helpful, and just to know that this great resource is out there for folks. But thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. I think this is invaluable, and personally, I know that in my clinical work, I encounter a lot of students in these kind of high school, middle school positions. And even within El Futuro, we've tried to start initiatives within the schools where we do kind of interventions and groups to help Latinx students get informed about these things. And I think this is a great resource for those purposes. So thank you for putting it all, literally everything in one place. It's just really great. So if we can, for the folks that are on video, if we can give a video clap, maybe unmute yourselves and give Dr. Gonzalez a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, Laura, that's the best we can do in COVID times. But if you all liked today's presentation, I want you to also mark your calendars for our next webinar. We'll be touching, unfortunately, on the topic of grief and grief counseling with the Latinx community, as we know that our community has suffered quite a bit with the COVID pandemic. So we'll be having Dr. Trevino from Antioch University coming to talk to us about how we can work with our clients around these issues. So that's on March 26th from 10 to 11:30 at our regular time. And I want to, this is our first time that we're announcing this. So we have some big things coming soon. So we're going to have our first ever 3-part webinar series titled Enfrentando Barreras, Addressing Intersectional Disparities in Latinx Mental Health Practice. So this will come in April, May, and June. And the lineup is we're pretty excited about it. So on April 23rd, we have Dr. Margarita Alegria, who is the head of the Disparities Research Institute at Harvard University. And she will be talking to us about her work in moving research from policy down to practice. And again, with all of our webinars, it'll be very practically oriented. We will then, if you join us, you'll be having the opportunity to be part of an episode of Latinx Therapy podcast. So the host, Adriana Alejandre, and her co-host, Ariana Lozano, will be talking about intersectional issues of LGBTQIA plus identities and Latinx mental health. Just a word of caution, we will not be able to provide continuing ed credit for that webinar, but you will be able to be part of that podcast episode. It's just some red tape issues there. And then finally, if you came to our conference back in October of 2020, you might have heard Doctors Nayeli Chavez Dueñas and Hector Adames present, and they're just wonderful speakers. So they'll be wrapping us up with a chat on how to instill hope and deal with issues of colonialism when working with Latinx mental health. And this webinar series will, so beginning in April, this will be the kickoff of our efforts to remain sustainable long-term. So we at La Mesita, as you probably know, have been thus far married to grant funding, and that is soft money and money that's not always available. So in an attempt to continue to be able to bring this level of educational content to you, we will begin charging for our webinars. We've done comparisons and we've received consultation on this, and we feel like we have enough support from the community to make this viable. These prices we've heard are on the low end compared to what people typically might be spending on this kind of content. So we hope that you'll stick with us despite this change, and really in the knowledge that it's so that we can continue to do this for many, many years to come for our NC provider community. We will be providing discounts throughout the years. This webinar series will have a discount if you sign up for all 3. And then we will also have some opportunities for needs-based scholarships. So appreciate you all so much for being here with us Please join us on the network. If you haven't already, pretty simple, you go to la-mesita.mn.co and create a profile, and then you're plugged into everything we're doing. And you can see a recording of today's webinar along with all of the other webinars on the left-hand side. If you hit topic and you go to recordings of La Mesita webinars, they're all accessible there. So that will wrap us up for today. Thank you again so much, Dr. Gonzalez, for being here, and thank you all for being here and joining in this conversation, and spread the word about this amazing resource. Get it all over North Carolina so we can continue helping our Latinx community. So thank you, Laura. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next month. Take care, everyone.